So let's move on with the demo. So I will show you exactly how we connect to vCenter, how we connect, and how everything works together. I will use my personal lab, so I'm going to close the UCS manager for now. Let me open up the right remote desktop. So I'm running a home lab here. Let me check if I... Yeah, I'm still running a Nexus 1000V, so let me first get rid of that. There we go. So I'm just cleaning up a previous Nexus 1000V. That should be gone right now. There we go. So I can kill this machine right now. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to first roll out a VSM. So we're first going to roll out the virtual machine. So I hope everybody can read it. The letters are quite small, I know, but I will guide you a little bit through there. So, why does this take so long? Ah, there we go. Just want to get rid of this machine. All right, so I'm running 4 different ESX servers here. They are nested, so don't pay attention to the ESX setup, but I have 4 ESX servers. Actually, I have 5 because I also have an out-of-band device. So I have a 5th ESX server where I'm going to run my VSM on. So the VSM is going to run outside of the ESX cluster that it's going to manage. So in this case, what I'm going to do, the Nexus 1000V is just an OVF template. If you're familiar with OVF templates, it means I just install a certain file, and that file will ask me a number of questions that it needs to install, and then it can run. So this is just a template file for a virtual machine. So it's going to tell you, hey, you are configuring a Nexus 1000V. So by the way, there are multiple ways of configuring this. I like to use this one because now you can exactly see what I'm doing. You can exactly see the whole process of configuring the VM kernel ports. There's also an automatic way of doing this by using the Nexus 1000V installer app. It's a Java application that's going to automatically roll out virtual machines. It's going to add hosts to the distributed switch. It's going to create a virtual switch. It's going to create the right profiles. That sounds perfect. If one step fails, you need to roll back the whole thing. You need to delete all kinds of things. You need to clean up everything. I like to use this way because now I have some more control over it. But of course you need to be a little bit experienced with doing it, but because there are a lot of steps involved. So I roll out, I accept the license agreement, of course, and I'm going to say this is the UCS class Nexus. I'm going to configure an installer. So this is not the installer app, this is just the installation wizard for Nexus 1000V. I can also configure a secondary VSM, meaning that will configure this module as being module 2 instead of module 1. So module 1 is always the primary, module 2 is the secondary, so it will set the roles for me. In this example, I'm just configuring one VSM. So where I'm going to host it, somewhere on my NFS storage. Now, the mapping of my networks. Do I want to map it to which network? So here I'm going to match the control network, the packet network, and the management network. In my case, I only have one VLAN, so I'm going to run them in the same VLAN all. But because what I'm going to do is I'm going to run layer 3 connectivity across the management interface. So all my communication between the VSM and the VEM will run across the management interface. So I technically do not need the other two. So I'm just going to go next. Now I will get a couple of questions. First of all, what's the domain ID? Now, what is the domain ID? The domain ID is comparable to the VPC domain ID. So what that means is I need to have an identifier between the primary and the standby supervisor. If the domain ID matches, it means that I'm running in the same system and I can run the same protocol, the same software. So I'm just configuring, let's say domain ID 123. I don't care. What is the password? So I'm just configuring IP export 123. So what is the admin password? Just an initial question. Which IP address are you going to use to manage the Nexus 1000V? That's going to be this address. That's going to be mine. Just an IP address in your network. Default gateway. And we go next. We say finish, and now it's going to roll out a new virtual machine in our environment, copy the disk to the server, and we're done. So as you saw, it said here in the status message, it deployed an OVF template. And here it is, UCS class Nexus. I'm going to power it up. So now it's going to boot Linux, just NXOS. It's booting Linux right now. Unfortunately, I cannot zoom into these letters, so if they're small, I will go out of this very fast because as soon as I have IP connectivity, I can use SSH. So this can take about a minute or so. Oh, it's almost done. So the initial boot takes a while. The second boot is faster. Because it needs to set some settings and stuff. So it's running a script. Saving config. And now I should get a pop-up window. There we go. Now we can log into the switch. So if everything is correctly configured, I should be able to connect through it through secure CRT. And we can. This is my newly configured Nexus 1000V switch. Check the IP address. Oh. It's running 172.22.1.207. That's what I configured just now. It has no host name. It just has an IP address. So what is the other configuration that I have? I have VLAN 1. I have my management VRF configured. And I have some default Nexus OS settings, nothing special here. What I first want to do is, as I said, I want to set up the connection between the vCenter and the VSM. Remember, going back to our diagram, I want to connect the vCenter. So that's what I'm going to do first. How do I do that? As I said, I'm running HTTPS between the two, which means that I need to import the certificate into vCenter. So I need to agree on the HTTPS certificate of this vCenter. I'm going to do that through the Manage Plugins variant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a browser. I'm going to browse to the IP address of the Nexus 1000V. I will get this beautiful interface. Here I can download the VEMs to roll them out to my blades using Update Manager. I'm not going to do that now because I already installed the VEM on the blades. I just use VMware Update Manager for that, and that's already installed. So all I need is the XML file, because here in this XML file it has the SSL certificate. So for the UCS class, correctly downloaded, and now I can install that here in the Manage Plugins window, browsing to it. For the UCS class, and this is going to contain an SSL certificate. Register it. There we go. So I now registered my Nexus 1000V SSL certificate with vCenter. Excuse me. What do I need to do now? I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see what's happening, because it's always very interesting to monitor the task window down here and see what's happening. What I'm going to do is I'm going to configure my SVS connection. SVS stands for, I'm not going to lie right now, SVS is, I don't know, something about managing VMs. I'm configuring an SVS connection. That is going to be my vCenter connection. So I'm going to call this vCenter with a very creative name. I don't care how it's named, because here I'm configuring the remote IP address of the vCenter server. In my case, that's this IP address. This is a vCenter server, so I'm going to configure the protocol for VMware. Actually, it's the only supported protocol, but we need to configure the protocol, the VMware protocol. Next, I say the VMware, create a VMware distributed switch within a certain data center, and a data center is just a container in VMware. In my case, the container data center is called Maverick. So I'm going to call the data center Maverick here. This needs to match, it's case sensitive. Make sure your data center name matches with the data center name here. And because I already imported that SSL certificate, I can now do a connect. And you will see here in the task window, if everything works, and it does, you will see all kinds of tasks here. And it's initiated by the Cisco Nexus user. And that Nexus user is the SSL certificate doing this. And as you can see, it has the brilliant name of switch. Not a very common name, right? So if I now go to my networking configuration in VMware, I see that I now have a new folder called switch with a switch called switch with two port profiles or two port groups. I have a quarantine virtual port group and a quarantine uplink port group. That means that if I delete a port group or if I do something stupid with my Nexus, ports will end up in the quarantine groups. In the quarantine groups, and it can of course not send any traffic. That's just a default group that's always going to be there, and I cannot delete it. Now I want to give this switch a better name. So I'm going to say the host name is UCS class. That's going to automatically upgrade the host name here right inside VMware. So that's cool, right? All right, so we configured vCenter connection. Now we need, going back to our initial statements, now we need to connect to the VEM. How do we connect to the VEM? By creating a VM kernel port. So going back to my VMware system, I'm going to add host 3 and 4, these two hosts. These two hosts, I configured for them a VMware kernel port. Where is it? Yeah, it's one of these. It's VM kernel 1. So VMK1, this is the one I'm going to use. It has an IP address configured, or I can add a new one. Let me add a new one. I add a VM kernel port. Let me delete this one first then. Probably doing something. I add a VM kernel port. I currently say just reuse your current virtual switch. Question, are these steps documented in Cisco documentation available in the lab? These steps you do not need to do. These are all related to the installation of the Nexus 1000V. I just want to run you through the whole process so you see what you need. But this is all done for you in the lab. All you need to do is make sure that this configuration is as it should be. So all I care about is this, the VSM configuration. But now I just want to make sure that you know what that SVS connection, for example, does. Because that's what I just configured, right? That protocol VMware, I configured the IP address, I exchanged an SSL certificate. So you need to know what that SVS connection does. And on the SVS domain configuration, I configured a way to communicate between the VSM and the VEM. The default connection is using layer 3 multicast, and it is using the management 0 interface as a source. If I'm running this in layer 2 mode, I would configure a control VLAN and a packet VLAN. Now that's by default set to 1. Because it is using layer 3, I don't care about these two. So VM kernel port. And now I just type in the IP address for the port. So I just type in the IP address that I'm going to use to communicate between the VSM and the VEM. This has nothing to do with VMware itself. I'm going to use this port, this IP address, to communicate between the VSM and the VEM. I'm now going to cancel this because I already have one. I have this 107 address on the 3, and I have the 108 address on server 4. So I'm going to use VMK1. That's how it's called, interface VMK1. I'm going to use that interface for the communication between the VSM and the VEM. So next step, I need to create 3 port profiles. An uplink, one for my layer 3 control, and one for my VMs. We first start with the uplink. And that's just going to be Nexus configuration. So we're in configuration mode, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say port profile type is Ethernet. So I can choose between two. I can choose between Ethernet and virtual Ethernet. This time I choose for Ethernet and I say these are my uplinks. What configuration do I need? First of all, switch port mode trunk, because I'm trunking my VLANs. I'm going to allow VLAN 1, VLAN 10, VLAN 20. My native VLAN will be 1, which is the default of course as well, but I'm just configuring, it's just a switch port that I'm configuring. And very important, this is going to be a port channel. Now, normally I would configure a port channel number here. But in this case, I cannot do that because I do not have ports in this switch right now. I have no ports. So how do I configure a port channel and put ports in it? So it's going to automatically allocate the port channel number. So I'm going to set it to auto. And now I can set, do I want to have it mode on, active or passive? Well, I'm not running LACP. I cannot do that on the UCS. Assume that this is UCS. Cannot do that. So I'm just going to run mode on. In that mode on, I can specify the MAC pinning or that subgroup configuration. In my case, I'm going to say MAC pinning. Done. Now what remains is what I told here. To configure a port profile, switchport mode trunk, allowed VLANs, the channel group, and now we need those 3 special commands. No shut the port. I say VMware port group. And now the fun part, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller again. I'm going to zoom in because now if I'm going to say state enabled, you immediately see that it creates an uplink group called uplinks. So what did I forget right now? There's one command that I still need, and that is my system VLAN. So I'm going to say system VLAN is 1. Show run port profile. As you can see, I created an uplink port profile. I just configured it as a normal port channel interface, but I just have some additional commands, VMware port group, the system VLAN, and the state enabled. That's my physical uplink port profile.